Hey, I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd talk about this for a minute. Earlier on in my journey, I thought maybe my purpose was and is to heal narcissism. And back then, it was said that narcissism was something that couldn't be healed. And we were pointing our fingers at a certain segment of the population as narcissists. And in the beginning, when I woke up to narcissism, I felt very much victimized. I felt very angry and hurt and disempowered. I felt like I wasted my time. I felt like I got bamboozled. I felt like a fool. I felt humiliated. I felt like my needs had never been met one time in my whole life. But where I am now, the healed version of me, the version of me that first acknowledged the wounding patterns that I had around narcissism, then validated why I had them, accepted that I had them, and then I was present with the emotions, the feelings that I had in me about them. So I fully neutralized all the energy around narcissism for me. Came into 0 point, and then naturally saw that there was a whole other side of the story. Of course, I had my needs met, because if I needed something and I didn't get it, then I wouldn't have survived. And I've survived, haven't I? So, even though it's ideal that we humans get our emotions responded to as children, we get treated like they matter to our parents, even though that's ideal. It's ideal for building connections. And I've learned that connections can be anything, really. Like, you could connect to anyone. There was a period of time through my healing journey where I thought, I don't want to be bothered with small talk. I don't want to talk to people who want to talk to me about the weather. That was narcissism in me. Because I wasn't considering the other person. I didn't care about them and what they needed. I was being selfish, right? So I learned there's a lot of ways that narcissism hides in ourselves, in our society, in the way that we're operating. I also learned that connection can be done on any level. So if I'm just happen to be sharing space with another human who doesn't necessarily have a spiritually focused life, is not necessarily consciously aware about the things that I'm aware of, and doesn't have conversations in that realm, and they just want to talk about the weather. Well, I'm a human too. I'm in a human body that weather matters to also. I can relate to that. They've chosen a topic that is almost universally relatable. It's not meaningless. It's not shallow. It's a point of... It's an offering for relation. You know? Relating to each other instead of power struggling through. relating to each other, looking for what we can agree on or relate to in each other. The desire to understand another human, that's love. So, for anyone out there who's still at the stage of pointing fingers at the other, blaming and shaming the narcissist in their life, I would urge you to stop. I would urge you to know that it's a mirror. It's an absolute mirror, because it is very narcissistic to shame and blame someone and not take into consideration that they are actually using a strategy that they needed to use to survive the life that they've lived. Their coping mechanism just so happens to not deal on an emotional level the same way that someone else might be expecting or wanting them to, or even the way that they're pretending to. Well, if you found yourself in a relationship with someone who you call a narcissist, chances are you are also suffering from narcissism and codependency. And the codependency puts you in a position of desperately wanting another person in your life to validate you, to give you meaning, to make you feel good, to define your worth for you. Why is that? It's because you haven't been able to do that for yourself yet. And I can tell you that the so-called narcissist, the person who is narcissistically coping, the one you're shaming and blaming, is doing that too. They are using the strategy that they have come up with, which is it's normal, because so many humans are doing it. We know that it's a often chosen coping mechanism for dealing with certain circumstances in childhood. And so they too are desperate to be in a relationship, and they know that they have to lie sometimes. They have to paint the picture as if they are being all the things that they're supposed to be, or that the other feels entitled to. And the other feels entitled to that because of a dysfunctional relating pattern in the first place. A person isn't a bad human, a bad person, just because they don't deal on an emotional level. Yeah, it's bad to lie to people. It's bad to manipulate people. It's bad to coerce people. It doesn't feel good. But the person being lied to and manipulated and coerced is being shown something about themselves. They're probably ignoring red flags. They probably are all full of anxiety and depression because they've been ignoring their own indicators that something isn't right. And to put it all on the other person instead of taking responsibility for caretaking my own self, that would be very narcissistic of me, right? Because that would be me not taking responsibility for my own state and my willingness to participate in a relationship like that for an extended period of time, while simultaneously disregarding what created that coping mechanism for that person, which, by the way, was a trauma, and expecting them to be different because I'm entitled for them to be different. That would be narcissistic of me to do, you see? It's wrong to present this person as a bad person simply on the premise that they had to adapt to survive their situation. Two things make people cope in this narcissistic way, where they don't honor their emotional body. And those two things can also create somebody who breaks their own boundaries and is emotionally dysregulated and might identify as an empath. It's just a matter of what direction the person went in when they decided they needed to cope. And it's when the parent is smothering the child, not letting them have their own identity, trying to have them conform into what's expected, telling them how to be instead of taking the role of just keeping them safe. And the other is emotional abandonment. So, if a parent is manipulative through the emotional body and using their own emotions to try to manipulate their child, that child might decide to cope with that situation by writing off the emotional body and not dealing with that anymore, because it hurt too much and they couldn't deal with it. That does not make them a bad person. That might put them in a desperate situation, which would cause them to be dishonest sometimes. They're very emotionally dysregulated, just like the other person in the relationship who might identify as an empath and who will be pointing fingers, shaming and blaming. It's a mirror. We attract what we are. We're not going to end up in a relationship with somebody who is abusive if we don't have a matching wound to that. It just won't happen. It's not how the universe works. So when we find ourselves in a relationship and we wake up to the idea that there's some power struggle relating, some unfair dynamics, some lying, some cheating, some manipulation, something that we don't like, that doesn't feel good to us, it's our responsibility to handle that, to handle ourselves and to take responsibility for ourselves. And there may be a part of us that feels victimized by it. There may be a part of us that needs to feel like a victim. When we honor that part of ourselves, when we're present with the feeling of being victimized, we then move through that feeling. Because the act of being present with the part of us who feels victimized is like reparenting the childhood version of ourselves who initially got the wound in the first place. And this allows us to take full responsibility, to leave the relationship, to stop shaming and blaming, and even have compassion for the other person who is a human being who was traumatized and is just trying to cope, and who may or may not be prepared to deal with those emotions, and certainly does not have to answer to anybody else telling them that it's time, or they must do it, or that I'm entitled to have them do it, you know? If they've gotten away with lying for a long, long time, they might choose to continue on into another relationship with somebody who will believe their lies. I think one of the more difficult things is if when you identify as an empath and you can feel into the person's soul, if you're spiritually aware and you can understand that this person is good in the heart, this person is a genuine, loving, caring human being, but also a soul. And if you are in love with this soul and you're wanting the human being to reflect the energy of the soul that you know is there, it's nothing you can demand. It's nothing that you're entitled to. It's nothing that you can shame or blame into being. And it can be difficult. It can be hard and sad to realize that love isn't enough. Compatibility matters. And if you're fully healed, you may be in a position to hold space for somebody who isn't fully healed. Maybe. But I think you have to really check yourself and know that it's the self-loving thing to do. Depends on where that person is in their journey, right? We know sometimes when somebody's healing, they just take it step by step and will deal with whatever's in front of them. And others will not be able to take that approach and will slide backwards and self-sabotage and turn to addictions instead. We can't control other people. And if we don't want those type behaviors in our life because we know that it pulls us down and it degrades the stability of a foundation that we thought we were on with the other person, then we have to make some tough decisions. And that tough decision is to mourn the loss of a relationship with someone you love. And if you love someone, you don't just turn that off. But it doesn't make sense to continue living with or being in relationship with somebody who you're not compatible with. If people don't grow together, they outgrow each other. And it happens. This isn't fairy tales like the stories we've been told and the movies that we've watched. Humans are here for certain reasons, different souls for different reasons. And relationships serve a very important purpose in the spiritual journey. They really have the ability to reflect you back to you, to trigger you into your own programming and help you see your shadow, which is a beautiful gift. So if you are adept at shadow work, you just clear it up and you're one step closer to being your authentic version. So a relationship can really accelerate growth. And I think it's the idea of having someone grow alongside me is very exciting. I was going to say that it's the best, but I realized that I'm claiming that when I haven't even had that experience yet in this lifetime. I've been in relationships that were growth-inducing, but we did not grow together or closer. It was usually growing apart. And that's okay. And there was a time where that wasn't okay for me. That was a time that felt really bad, and I was in a lot of pain. But today, I can look back and see that those relationships pointed out to me all the places in me that I had a coping mechanism from childhood that was no longer serving me, that was holding me back, that was making me act a fool, that was making me act in ways that I didn't want to be anymore. I didn't want to act like that. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to do those things. They didn't sit well with me when I saw myself in that light. And I wouldn't have acted those ways if I hadn't been activated in those ways by the other person, right? Like if I had never been in a relationship, then I wouldn't know that I was sort of entitled in some ways, right? Expecting that I would even have a relationship. It's not necessarily a given. It isn't necessarily true that you just get assigned someone, that there's someone for everyone. It's likely. It's likely that you can match up with somebody, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be just happily ever after. It doesn't mean that you won't have work to do. How well do you know your soul's plan? How well do you know what you came here to do? Can you comfortably state what it is you're here to do? And if not, the rest is just your desire. And depending on your spiritual journey, desire is a whole other can of worms. So I feel like I've been having discussions lately with somebody who has a loved one who is in a relationship with someone who is really coming down on them, shaming, blaming them, calling them the bad guy, basically. And this person, their loved one, is really upset about it because it's like their loved one's significant other is really ganging up on them and feeling very entitled and taking advantage. And it's hard for this person to watch their loved one in this situation. And I get it. I totally get it. I mean, it does suck, right? It does suck. But from where I sit, and it's like, it's pretty much that way with every other person also. Like every other person that's still in their shadow attributes that are holding them back, limiting, and then hurting themselves and others. There's a lot of people like that, you know? We can't change other people. They're on their own journey. It's not for us to decide or judge or say whether they're on track or not or any of that. That's not our business, because we have enough to do with our own journey, with our own perspective, with our own stuff. Unless somebody's asking us for help, unless somebody's come to us for our opinion on the matter, it's really a matter of doing our own work about how we feel about what we're seeing and getting to the point where we are healed and understand that everybody is on their own journey, that we have been present with our own emotions about that, whether it be frustration, sadness, anger, bitterness, resentment. Whatever it is that we feel, we need to be present with that so that we know that we're the one who loves ourselves, even though we feel a way about that. And then compassion. When we understand that they are on their own journey, we can hold compassion knowing that they will find their way. Just the same way I'm guided, the next person has guidance as well. Ask and you shall receive. So all of the people who are shaming and blaming others, it's a very narcissistic act. Not just within a relationship, but just in general, in society. It's unkind to expect somebody to be someplace they're not, because you don't like where they're standing and what they're thinking and believing and saying. It's like, you're not in their shoes. You can pretend to be in their shoes for a minute and try to see their point of view if that helps you. But the only one that could ever know their point of view is them and God. The kindest thing you can do is try to understand it. And if you can't try to understand it, at least accept it. It would take a long time for me to understand everybody's perspective. But I accept that everyone has a different perspective. And that the perspective they have is the one they're meant to have. That's the experience that they're having. I'm not an expert on their experience, you know? And I have to take responsibility for myself. So if I come into a situation where I'm attempting to relate to another human being and it's not going well and they're not reciprocating in kind, I simply choose to make space between us. But I don't leave wanting to give revenge or cursing them or judging them or saying that they're wrong. I just leave giving them the space that they need to live out the experience they're having. That's it. That's the kindest thing that I can do for me and for them. It's the win-win-win. I win because I've now created space for myself to not be in the experience where I'm being treated unkindly. It's a win for them because they're having the experience they apparently need to learn from or to navigate life or to learn from these perspectives that they're having. And it's a win for all because I'm not starting a war. It's not about who's most powerful or who proves themselves right or wrong. Power is something we use to keep ourselves on track. That's it. We don't need power to overpower someone else. We just need power to keep ourselves going, to give ourselves what we need, to give ourselves what we want, to work towards our goals, to persevere, to make the time and space for us to relax when we need to. That's what our power is for. We don't ever need to overpower somebody else unless they are physically attacking us and it's a self-defense type situation. I'm not saying just hope they don't stab you or anything like that. I mean, if you're in a dangerous situation, you'll know what to do, hopefully. But I'm saying in general, violence is not going to serve us. We already know what happens. We've studied that one pretty good. And it's a form of violence to shame and blame another. It's a form of violence to tear somebody else down, even if it's in the privacy of your own home and your own family and your own relationship, and say that they're somehow lesser or wrong for coping the way that they cope. When you have a choice, and all that energy that you're using to shame and blame the other could be used to pick yourself up and out of the situation. Now, I know that codependency feels like there's an emergency and that you couldn't possibly leave this person. I get it. I know how serious it feels. And that is a wound that needs to be addressed and healed by you. Like, I had to do that for myself, right? Like, the longing for love was never going to be filled up by somebody else because it was longing for my own love. And that longing and that urgency and that feeling like I might die if I don't have another, all went away when I turned my focus back in on loving myself and giving myself what I need, instead of wagging my finger at another expecting them to do it. It's not their responsibility, and they're in trauma. They are in a trauma response. That's what they're doing. That's what they're living out. So I have to recognize that I'm in a trauma response when I'm trying to get them to do the thing. And someone's got to break this cycle. And other people are not lesser wrong or bad because they deal or cope with life in a way that doesn't allow them to use emotional responses to navigate with. Well, very likely, they're going to figure it out because it's sort of necessary to go forward on Earth. But let them figure it out, you know? Hold space for them knowing that they will figure it out if and when they are meant to. That's their journey. You better believe there are a lot of high-level souls here to break out narcissism from that perspective. They're powerful, they're ready, they're gonna do it. So just get busy doing your own, you know? That's all we can really do. Stop the war, stop pointing fingers, you know? Honor how you feel and then move through any feeling like a victim. Give yourself what you need. Just take one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. It took many years, but after taking the steps, day by day, sometimes minute by minute, I have convinced myself, I have fully earned back my own trust. I know I have my back. I know I'm lovable. I know I love myself. I'm so glad I took that journey, because when I realized I had to take that journey, when I understood that loving myself was the answer to my prayer of being in a happy relationship, I cried. That was a terrible answer for me. I didn't want to have to be the one to love myself. I wanted them to love me. That's why I was doing the research. How do I get to be in a relationship where we both love each other? You gotta love yourself. That can't be it. That can't be it. I want them to love me. I want them to love me. Do you see how that's the child version of me who just wanted my mom's attention? My mom's not bad or wrong because she couldn't give it. She was just doing what was taught to her. So we're here to break this apart. We're here to change the relating paradigm. And that starts with each of us caretaking our own selves, giving ourselves what we need, and ending the war within us, which will ensure that we don't have to continue having the war outside of us. And I hear some people going, well, everyone's not going to do it. It's like, who cares? Do your part. You do it. It's not your business then. The people around you, if you can't stand being around them when you're doing this for yourself, take some space. Maybe there'll be a point where you can go back around people and relate to them where they're at, and maybe there won't be. But the self-loving thing to do is at least give yourself a chance if you are willing to actually do it for yourself, you know? If you want to, you can. And it's worth it.